When the passage was sent out for the reading, John Szymanski, that just read it, dutifully responded to me and said, "Are you sure you want to have the same passage read that was read on Easter last week?" Some of you may have noticed, I guess not many, that it's the same passage. But it is indeed, and I confirmed to John, yes, I would like us to deal with that passage again. Not for any specific reason, but just because we had communion on Easter Sunday and there wasn't nearly enough time to really get into the text and try and work with what should be the basis, according to Protestant tradition, of a service, the text, and what we find in there. So today, some thoughts in continuation of the Easter service. The sermon title, "How Can You Not Get That?" How can you not get that? From Myanmar and the Rohingya, that minority group was a Muslim group in a majority Buddhist country, and where the much celebrated Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi is now the leader, the president, comes the plea from the Rohingya and others aware of their situation, a request to Facebook. So please, work on your platform. Work on your business practices, work on your ethics so that genocide can be halted and the persecution that the Rohingya is suffering can be averted or ceased. And I found it very interesting, not the irony that, a Nobel Peace Laureate that was so celebrated is now conspicuously quiet in the persecution of the Rohingya, but also that the debate that we are having about Facebook and what happened to our data and looking back at it and thinking about what we will say in the future when we looked back at this period in the history of civilization and especially the use and abuse of big data. I wonder what we will say about this era, where technology was ahead of business ethics and of, in many cases, common sense, and where we are in a painful way again discovering that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. When you give away something for free, you are being suckered. When it's in a business context, I would like us as church to give away stuff for free without having another agenda, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to convey. How can you not get that? That would probably be my theme that I would select for the Gospel of John. How can you not get that? And that word's being spoken from the author and the community that gathered around the gospel, this version of the gospel, gathered around Jesus and their understanding of Jesus, saying that to the rest of the Jews, the Jewish communities, and the different groups within Judaism at that stage or what was surviving of it, and especially looking back at the time that this gospel speaks about. Here we find in this passage and in many other places in the Gospel of John, the accusation, you Jews, you are the Jesus killers. You killed Jesus. You had him crucified. A very, very direct accusation throughout the Gospel of John. You get this undertone. You Jews are guilty. You killed Jesus. We find it in other Gospels as well, but very subtle, woven there, perhaps a bit in Matthew, but not so much, and then in Luke also. If you want to read between the lines, you can see that. And then there are references in letters that's attributed to Paul, but in most cases are not really, scholars think, the work of Paul, but it was brought in there as well. And if we look at the group that formed around this gospel, I think the key is to look at the time when the Gospel of John was written. Scholars these days mostly placed it within the 2nd century, the latest gospel to be written, around the year 115. Perhaps later, some say 125. Let's not argue about that. I assume the scholarship that places it in the 2nd century. What happened here? If you think that Jesus was crucified in the year 29, and the Jewish temple was destroyed in the year 70 after that successful uprising from 66 to 70 against the Roman Empire, and the Romans were actually driven out of Jerusalem. And then the empire struck back and destroyed everything, including the temple. Make the big stones, made them small stones, and made the small stones powder, pulverized it literally. Looking back at that, I can see the followers of Jesus now looking back and said, if you got it that Jesus was the Messiah, and you didn't have him killed with the people who cooperated from the temple side with the Roman Empire so that he was crucified, perhaps the temple wouldn't have been destroyed. Perhaps the Romans would have indeed been driven out of Jerusalem. And perhaps then, if you hadn't killed him, you other Jews that didn't get it that he was the Messiah, if you didn't do that, perhaps then God's new Jerusalem would have been with us. The Gospel of John has this inside group, the people in the know, the people that got it. They knew Jesus was the Messiah according to themselves. The other ones didn't get it. Those dumb Jews, they didn't get it that he was the Messiah, and they had him killed. And if you look at the historical timeline, this is a time when Jews were suffering. They were being persecuted in the Roman Empire, when Christians were also suffering. So the followers of this author and this community, the inside track, the people in the know, they were saying, you dumb people, look what you caused. You had the Messiah killed. A simple narrative that if you decontextualize it, if you take it from that context and just put it there on its own. And that's what Western civilization did in the years following. They latched onto that and slowly built the narrative, the simple narrative that the Jews are the guilty ones. They had Jesus killed. Look, here in the Word of God we find it. John says it outright. You Jews, the Jesus killers. And we had that reinforced, like for instance in the Passion plays all over the world. And then the outcome of that eventually, when it was given sacred affirmation by churches, was, we all know, the Holocaust. And like with all simple narratives that it's not willing to look at nuance, we now put the Germans in the box. They are the Jew killers now who killed Jesus. But the Jews are the guilty ones, and for our own convenience, we forget the complicity of so many nations, including our nation, in enabling that, in not speaking up when it was necessary, on being quiet and silent for very long, and in many cases, looking the other way for convenience sake. It is human to decontextualize, to develop a simple narrative, often for the sake of convenience, often for the sake of protecting your own interest and your own power base. People do it, we do it. We like the simple narratives for a complex reality. Creating the evil in the other is convenient and it's easy. It has literally deadly effects. We're not kept in check. We're not exposed, and we're not opposed. If I look at my country of birth, South Africa, there's also a simple narrative about my country of origin, about very similar stuff. In South Africa, some of you may perhaps know that we have the K word there, like the N word here. And if you look at the origin of the K word, it comes from an Arabic word, kafir, which means the heathen, the non-Muslim people, or people who mean harm to Muslim people. And that was accepted by the South African white community, who is about as Christian in origin as you can imagine, even more so than this nation. They accepted that Arabic word as the equivalent of the N word when you want to speak in derogatory terms about people of color or black people. And we know the system that was implemented by some. And we have the simple narrative about all pale faces from South Africa. I know it. I mean, we live through it as well. But on the other side, we also have the same thing from the black side. The two terms, depending on which language family you take. In the Sotho language family, the white people are called Lechua. Lechua, which means the thing that troubles me. The thing that troubles me. And its origin is a tick that attaches it to the hind quarters of cattle. That's what the pale faces are the way that we refer to in South Africa. Or in the Zulu or the Nguni language family, of which the Zulus are the most prominent exponent, we're called Mulungu. Now, if you take the polite meaning of the word, it can mean God, or the gods, or a god. But it's applied in that sense, the meaning is given to it of the foam that washes up on the beach, that dirty drift foam that washes up on the beach. And the objectifying of people, as I say, is common in all cultures, but it leads to destruction, and it leads, in the end, if left unchecked, to genocide. I think Americans are very good at making movies post the fact of genocide, like Rwanda. There is a huge wringing of hands and, a million people killed. But while it was on the lead up to that, there was a conspicuous silence. And Americans are not unique in that sense. But I think we should learn from the past. We should learn from this passage and other passages that we find in our sacred text as well, that even in this context, where followers of Jesus claim to have the inside track and that specific knowledge that gives them that red telephone to God to properly understand what's going on and to claim sacred affirmation of their specific perspective. We should learn from that and look at our times as well. And sometimes I fear for the soul of this nation and for the souls of the churches of this nation. Sometimes I fear for the soul of this church as well. Because I think, because we are human, we sometimes tend to follow this path of an easy narrative as well, and of creating what is wrong as residing in the other. When our family returned from that paradise in the mind of America, New Zealand, Lord of the Rings and everything beautiful that you can imagine, we came back because we love this country. We want to be with Americans because America stands for something. And I wanted to be with the UCC again because the UCC also stands for something that is very central to my core beliefs and what I would like to base my life on. But sometimes I despair. And I wonder, after all the work and the sacrifice of Martin Luther King Jr. and the narratives that we create around him and around his life. And after the example of the one who we claim to follow, of Jesus and his life and his sacrifice, what is the narrative that we are writing with our lives in these critical days, where we are again seeing the evil being projected on the other, and where we are again seeing us claiming that we have the inside track, like the community that birthed the Gospel of John? We know. And we look at that and said, you damn idiots. How can you not get that? How can you not see that I am right and that you are wrong? Some of you may get tired of me saying this, but I won't stop. So settle in. You'll hear more of it. Because I think it is necessary. I will not give up on the ideal of us being able to look at the Gospel of John within context and say this was an intra-Jewish conversation. So many Jews, millions, were killed unnecessarily. If we were not so lazy as Christians, if we were willing to do our homework. Let's not repeat that again. As God's people, let us see the New Jerusalem, the city on the hill, that brings light and life to lives and to people. Let us be that remnant today that is willing to reach across these aisles and every division that you can imagine, for the sake of the one that we say that we follow and that we are disciples of, for the sake of the sacrifice of people like Martin Luther King, who I think would be very sad if he could witness what has happened to the ideals that he tried to embody. How can we not get it that we live in critical times where it is our sacred responsibility to claim the common ground of the ideals that make us different from the world? And there are many ways to describe that. The fruits of the Spirit, of love, of compassion, of kindness, of gentleness, and so forth. We know the stuff. We know it. Let us as church, in the near future, listen to our speakers that will share their perspectives of Bill Quigley today, others following. And let us then in March in May continue the process of describing what we see as our vision. Let us get it, that this is no ordinary time. There is so much at stake. Let us walk with one another purposefully, doing God's work, embracing what is noble, living in God's love, and walking together into a future that is the city of God, or the realm of God, the kingdom of God. Let us get that. Amen.